very, very dangerous.
Get these spidey sense, I was like, oh, something's off.
And I'm just like, man, I'm waiting to hear something,
Keep that crowd warmed up. Is Mr. Yahola Tiger.
What's going on, y'all? Welcome to the 20th episode of the War Cry podcast. We're at the big 2-0. I'd kind of been holding back. Oh, by the way, I'm your host, Yahola Tiger. And so I've been kind of waiting a little bit to talk about this topic. Today I'm going to talk about Dogman. But before we do that, I always got to break down, guys, how my week is going. Just keeping y'all updated. So I'm recording this on, what is today? Monday, the day after Easter. Actually, you guys will be getting this, I believe, on Monday too as well. So, a pretty eventful weekend. Nothing too light or nothing too crazy. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm actually, a girl dad times two now. I just had my second daughter Thursday afternoon. And so that's why you guys are getting this a little late. Obviously family comes before the podcast, and, having a second little one, some of y'all know how it is. It's rough out here. But I snuck away for a little bit, just to record the podcast and kind of get away and kind of do my thing. And so, while, watching, becoming having another kid, another child, I happened to come across a documentary called Grizzly Man. So, Timothy Treadwell, how this goes, he had been a documenting, entertainer. His goal was to basically film and get a TV show either on Animal Planet, Discovery Channel, National Geographic, all those shows. That was his goal. And so what he would do is he would film like different, scenes, and he'd get up close and like super crazy close up to these bears. And one thing about this documentary that I thought was, I'm not going to spoil it. I mean, it came out in 2003. If you haven't heard of this or seen this, I'm still not going to spoil everything for you. But basically, he goes out in the middle of Alaska and films these bears. And he's a character. He's a former drug head, former alcoholic. He gave all that up for the bears. Like, he was out in the middle of the wilderness with these bears and made a promise to these bears. So there's a little bit of kind of mental illness, kind of paranoia, but it details his 13-year basically journey of documenting these bears. And one thing that I just found kind of interesting is, I'm glad they did put this in the documentary. They talked to the natives up there. And so the natives up there were not happy with him, like, at all. And I tend to agree with them. There's a boundary between man and beast. And one thing that, was always taught to me growing up is, if you don't want it, or if you go looking for it, it's going to find you and it's going to get you. And you're just going to meet you halfway. And that's one thing that I think that Timothy did, is he met it full on, and he, ended up biting the bullet for it. But one thing I'm glad that they did, I did, get the indigenous people out there in Alaska and got their opinion on it. To me, I'm going to be honest with you, it's kind of sad. It's like really sad, especially the ending, and then you find out what, like, kind of how things took place and like how, I guess you'd say, fate works. But I watched it on Tubi, and it's called Grizzly Man. Super sad documentary. But if you want to see, some crazy scenes, like he films a full-on bear fight, like between two massive bears, and it's kind of crazy. He filmed all types of, like them eating salmon. Like, it was cool. It was like super cool scenes that he caught. But Was it at the detriment of himself or at the detriment of the bears? Who we may never know. So another documentary that, show that I've been watching, and it's kind of interesting. It's on Apple TV Plus. It's called Invasion. It's got Sam Neill from. I'm only like 2 episodes in, but basically, it's if an alien invasion happens, and basically you have minutes to get your bearings together. So the name of the show is called Invasion, and it details a couple stories. One of them is pretty nasty, like a nasty story, like nasty behavior, which when I first saw that, I was like, God bless, this guy is wilding out. But no, so go check that out. Basically, it's about aliens are coming, and it details. It kind of slowly introduces the aliens as the episodes go. So go check that out. Invasion. It's on Apple TV Plus. So, like I said, the topic today is Dogman. I'm trying not to be too wordy and windy with this one. I'm sure I could probably talk about this for a while because there's so many theories out there. But originally, the topic Dogman or werewolves is another word to call them. It dates all the way back to the Greeks and the Epic of Gilgamesh. And essentially, Ishtar, she had basically turned one of her lover into a wolf. And that's the first iteration of ever, it being written down on a piece of paper, of that. And it's the Epic of Gilgamesh. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But, one thing too that as you go through the annals of history and you kind of look at cultures, there are a lot of cultures all over the world, who talk about these upright walking wolves. One that's depicted is the Egyptians and the hieroglyphs. You see, different. I guess you could say they're like Anubis. They look like Anubis. The gatekeeper of the underworld. But they show up all over the place. The only places they don't really show up are Russia, Japan, and Africa. It's the only places where I haven't seen any culture. I may be wrong. There may be someone out there hear this and be like, oh no, it's actually this. But one thing that, as I bring it closer to us here in America, and especially here in Oklahoma, Dogman is often looked up as a shapeshifter. It can be looked up as a shapeshifter. And there's 2 different ways to look at Dogman. Most people think of it as, like I said, mentioned as a shapeshifter. And, someone wears the hide of a wolf and they turn into, a wolf. One thing too about Dogman is it's not just one thing. Some people think Dogman doesn't transform. It's that way the entire time. I've heard theories of Dogman being, genetically modified between a wolf and a man. There's also theories out there that they are interdimensional, and they can travel and they have technology and they're smart type of creatures. There's a theory out there. I mentioned it on episode 19, Observations. There's a theory that just kind of was brought to my attention that Bigfoot was basically the masters of Dogman. Dogman is described as pointed ears, snout, much like a wolf, and red eyes. Now I have heard amber eyes. I've heard yellow eyes. But I've also a lot of it that I've read and seen has been red eyes. And a story that goes with that. So on Unsolved Mysteries of the Reservation, we had a person write in a story to us, and it comes out of Oklahoma City, in a pretty busy part of Oklahoma City. Well, as a kid, she grew up, in the So it was it was a neighborhood, but it had a little stretch of woods kind of at her backyard, and she would often kind of feel uneasy or like something was watching her at that at the edge of the woods. And one night she was laying in bed and she happened to look at the window and there was this dog. It's a wolf. It was looking at her and it had, and I can't remember if, like I said, it's been a while since I've read that story, but it's crazy. Sometimes I can remember stories and sometimes I can't, but I can't remember if she said it had red eyes or yellow eyes. I want to say she said it had red eyes. I'll have to go back and if I'll make a correction in a later episode. But sometimes, guys, like I said last week, you're never batting 1,000. Anyways, but she had seen this thing, quite a bit. Not quite a bit, but she had felt this thing for quite a bit, but then finally saw it, and it was looking at her through the window. So it tormented her. That's what these dogmen are known for, is tormenting. A crazy story that I had heard on a podcast from I'm going to mention a few podcasts here too as well. I think this one comes from Lance Hightower's his podcast, Monster 911. And I believe this comes from his, but there's been stories of dogmen, somebody doing something to it, taking a pop shot at it like 30 miles away, and it ends up at their house, like there. So these things they play games, and I often think about the jackal. Back in like kind of Egyptian days, the jackal always was playing, known as the trickster god. And, so I always think of that, sometimes, when I hear those stories. For me, Dogman, like, I have never had a Dogman experience. I've never, I guess you could call Merle home, Dogman type of encounter, but one thing that about these creatures that it's to me is very frightening is the fact that it kind of shows almost like a innate awareness of like what it's doing. Like it's letting you know, like, hey, I could hurt you. I could really do some damage to you. A story I heard from Dark Waters YouTube page, and this is kind of a crazy one, but someone had sold this ranch, and the real estate person just telling him the story. And basically, they were having this party. What they were told not to have a party, they had to not to have anything going on at night after the sun goes down. Well, then come to find out, there's all these dogmen around here. So it's and they were messing with them, tormenting these people. And these are all like people looking at this nice fancy house in the middle of nowhere. But that's one thing, and that. One thing too that's like kind of crazy about them is like people always assume them like how Bigfoot has normal people feet, like how humans have their feet. People say that the Dogman has basically those werewolf type feet where like all the haunches are off or weird, and like they're like the knees are pointed backwards and the feet are pointed forward, which like a dog if a dog stood up. But to get to maybe some more history. So Linda Godfrey, she passed away here in the last year, but she came out with a book. And where I first heard of Dogman had to be back in the early 2000s, and she came out with The Beast of Bray Road, and it was on. Man, it was such a huge thing too back in the early 2000s because you didn't hear about these things. Like people are werewolves and vampires. That's like the thing. Like those are the things that people are like drawn to. But she came out with The Beast of Bray Road, and she had detailed in her newspaper sightings and reports and encounters that people were having on Bray Road. One of the most famous encounters they had was basically, I think it was a governor or a city employee was picking up roadkill off the side of the road and making sure that the roads were clean and no deer or anything were in the road. Well, he puts the deer back there. And he gets out, like he goes to put the deer up into the back of his truck, walks to the front, goes to start the car to leave, and he feels this kind of weird weight, like a shift in weight in the truck, and then a shift off. He was like, "Well, that was weird." He goes back there, and the deer's gone, or the deer's carcass is gone. Something took this, deer carcass. gone. Another one was another famous one was when somebody was having some car issues on the side of the road and on Bray Road, and they ended up seeing this thing behind their trunk and by their trunk behind the car, and all they could see basically the entire beast, and eventually they got the car to start and they ended up getting out of there. But like I said, Linda Godfrey to me is the, I wouldn't say godfather, but godmother or whatever you want to call it. To me, she's the OG when it comes to Dogman, because nobody was talking about this, and it was like a kind of a taboo thing to talk about, which still kind of is. I know the shout out to Bigfoot Crossroads, Matt, the host over there. He had a podcast with the Bigfoot Outlaws at a lot of points, and those guys were taking reports of Bigfoot, hyena-faced Bigfoots, and they didn't know what they were. And people were telling them, hey, I thought I saw Bigfoot, but it looked like a hyena, or it looked like, had pointed ears. And they thought it was another type of Bigfoot, like it was a different type. Or like, it looked different, or different species of Bigfoot. But, as like I said, more information started coming out and people started coming forward, and it wasn't as crazy to see a werewolf. That's what they were getting reports of. And so shout out to Linda Godfrey, rest in peace too. I know like I said, she had been writing multiple books. She was, like I said, the OG, the original, on Dogman. So shout out to her. And so that guided me into, finding different people on YouTube in the mid 2000s. So like 2008, maybe not mid 2000s, mid to late 2000s. And so about 2008, 2000 through 2010, I just, scoured and was looking, and I come across Dark Waters and, obviously Bigfoot Outlaw Radio. And, one thing that, I always found very interesting about Dogman was that it's the petty, like I said, I go back to pettiness, but a lot of it too is like, it's like the build up to a very scary movie, but then there's no payoff. And that's one thing that a lot of these stories that people talk about, is kind of crazy. And, to get into the conspiracy side of this, and this goes for Bigfoot and really any cryptids that you want to talk about, or that I can mention. There's people always mention the government conspiracy, that they were making super soldiers, and they were using, wolf and man and trying to mix them together to make a super soldier. A conspiracy back, 1940s, 1930s, was that Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were trying to design werewolf super soldiers, and they were using German wolves to do that. So that's kind of a crazy conspiracy too, because then that kind of compiles into another conspiracy where, like, if you got super soldiers, but then you also have, what happened? Did they get loose? So now they're all over the place. How did they get to America? And so, like, are we doing it over here too? So, but anytime someone has a Dogman encounter and they have a physical evidence and these are stories that I've heard on the internet and YouTube and places like this, but the conspiracy is that every time there's any type of evidence to find these creatures, government interference happens. Crazy story that I heard, and this is a super crazy story, and I can't remember who I heard this from, but this is it's one of those people that I mentioned before. If you heard some of those people, so there was a family that was living on a ranch, and they had lived there for a while, but they had known about these creatures, and I'll call them creatures, and they kind of lived in coexistence until they started messing with the house and they started doing things. Well, one of the family members ended up shooting one of these things, and they ended up going into basically all-out war. And one thing too that this is from Dark Waters too. I just remembered who it was from. But they lived in this house. Like, these things are so strong, that when they were running into the house, they were basically collapsing the frame of the house, and they were busting through walls. According to the story, there was, over a dozen of them, and this family had to fight these creatures off, like basically to stay alive. And this had kind of been a story that, has been whispered in that town. And I cannot remember the name of the town, and I can't remember where this is located, but I know it's in the south. And, they ended up fighting these things off, the first night. Well, all these family members and people, they're like, well, we got to get them out of here. So they were getting prepared so they reinforced the doors and basically went into all-out war, and eventually ended up having to move because these things were just overwhelming. They were just ungodly amounts of speed, like in power, and they couldn't, really, fend them off properly. And like I said, that's called the Siege of Lockett Ranch, and that's on YouTube. That's a Dark Waters story. Can we confirm if Dogman's real? So there was a study done back, I would say probably 7, 8 years ago, 10 at the most, by Melba Ketchum. And, she is a pretty prominent scientist. She had done all types of stuff, worked for the government, did government contracts. I believe even worked, not for NASA or someone along those lines. Like, she's a really smart person, really someone that knows what they're talking about when it comes to, science and doing testing and research. And she had reached out to people in the Bigfoot and Dogman community and had gotten, DNA samples. Some of those samples were never given back to her. And that's another part of the conspiracy, is why weren't they given the samples back? If they weren't anything, why are these government-funded facilities? I believe they were like the University of Minnesota. There was like all these, prominent testing labs that do the genome, and so of animals. And so that adds to the conspiracy too. Like, okay, well, these government-funded public institutions are, swiping away evidence that these things exist. And one thing too is kind of crazy. There was a guy that was working with her, and he had come out and he had mentioned, I believe it was Scott Carpenter, came out and was telling people like, hey, this is what this came down is like, nothing that we've ever seen before. This isn't matched to anything. There's no known match to this dog hair, and they even said they found flesh, which is kind of wild. But I'm going to be honest with you. For me, I can only envision this creature as a shapeshifter type creature. Stories passed down, and this is kind of where I'll go into, shape-shifting stories or shape-shifting lore. But the person that shapeshifts has to wear, obviously has to wear, some semblance of the animal that they want to turn into. But a lot of those, details are lost. But one detail that is very interesting to me about shapeshifting lore and culture is that I was told that they have to basically remove their organs to make room for the animal's organs. And they set them in a certain place, hiding them. And there's been stories, where people have done that. They have shifted, or they have turned into something, and they have left their organs in a place where it was not beneficial for them. And another animal came and ate them, and they could never turn back. And that could be another part of that Dogman thing too. It's just, people try to turn into a wolf, and they can stand up and do the whole thing, because the longer they're a wolf, or the longer they are, they could adapt, or they die. And I get kind of nervous talking about stuff like that, because it's like, I remember these stories, or those that information was given to me, and it's always kind of nerve-wracking to give it back because you want to get it right. But that's been a thing that's been going on for a long time. And there's stories. I'll give one out of northeast Oklahoma. There was 2 old Cherokee ladies, women, who beat for a lot of years. A lot of years. And they beefed all the way up until they got, into their, elderly years, and they winded up in the same nursing home. And workers at the nursing home, they'd say that at different times during the night, they'd see black dogs walking the halls, and depending on which one, was the two ladies, they'd be going in and out of their rooms. And so, it's pretty interesting, to kind of hear that, and that's kind of where that Dogman comes to me, and that's what it comes to mind when I hear Dogman. I think of the kind of out, Christopher Honka Hill, he does his travels, and he has told, he's told, stories of, skinwalkers and people that change like that and what they can do. And, one story that he hasn't really told, and I'm not going to tell it here, but, it has something to do with that, with something coming and going. That's a wolf type creature or entity or being or or medicine or magic or whatever you want to call it. One story that I was always told to me growing up, and I had heard this, from people just living in Tahlequah, is that there used to be a road out kind of, and I don't know if it's Bunch, but I can't remember exactly where it was at. But there used to be a wolf that used to walk up and down the road. Yeah, that used to walk up and down the road, and they'd catch it. Sometimes some people would see it, walking down the road. Another kind of a story that I've heard, and this is like I said, these are old. Like I said, I can't remember some of these people who told them because they've, if you've heard these stories that I'm telling, please, shoot me a message. Say, hey, that was my grandma. My grandma told that story. Please tell me so I can get their names right and give them their credit. Because, like I said, running around with Louis Jackson, my grandpa, we'd always they'd be talking to everybody about things, and so. I always wanted to make sure I get people's stories right, and if I didn't tell the story right, you tell me, give me the story and I'll tell it right, and I'll make adjustments, and you'll get that full blast, like that what is it, zero sugar Mountain Dew? No, we want full blast. But there's those stories out there, and there's another story that I had heard growing up that I thought was, it's a Dogman story. There was an elderly woman. No, I'm sorry. An elderly woman told this story, but this is when she was a little girl. So her and her cousins used to run around kind of right as, dusk started getting dark outside. And and I remember, I can hear it in her voice, but she was like, "What? Them coyotes were real going crazy." Kind of off in the woods a little bit, and she had some cousins who are, kin that was real crazy, and they like to, investigate things, go out there and see what's going on. And, she's too scared though, is what she said, kind of too scared to go out there, but her kinfolk did. And they said it sounded like yipping, like a baby coyote or like a baby, dog or something like that. It didn't sound real big. And they ended up going, kind of sneaking their way through the brush, and those coyotes stopped yipping when this little baby cry, baby type noise was heard. And they kind of peek through and they look, and it's a 8-foot tall standing wolf making that noise. It's almost luring them, kind of what it sounded like, So I always think of that story when I hear Dogman. I think of, kind of those kids, and I wasn't there, but, and it's not my story, but I can see the moonlight hitting that wolf just right, showing off just making it look real creepy like, but there's these stories out there all throughout in Indian country, of, different, shapeshifters, and this is, different type of stories, and as I'm sitting here talking, that's usually how it goes, but I had a family member who went home with this really pretty Indian girl, and he's like, I guess we'll go to bed, get up early. We got things to do tomorrow. And he wakes up and he kind of sees a firelight going through the window. He looks, and there was 4 upright walking wolves dancing around this fire, middle of the night. Man, I just imagine being being my relative that's seen that, that'd be crazy. But there's, like I said, there's different ways to see what you want to see and believe what you want to believe. The point of this podcast is to basically introduce people to things that they haven't heard before, or things that they have heard and maybe add something to it. And what's one thing that, I often kind of criticize my own self, my own podcast, like, oh, am I telling too much? Or am I telling not enough? Am I just keeping it bare bones? And, my thought is you get what you get. And then if there's a part two, eventually I'm going to have guests who, are going to come on. And like I said, I keep promising you guys that. And, I eventually I will. But that's one thing that I was kind of, critique myself on is, and especially with this podcast, it was, am I giving you enough? And, to me, this Dogman topic is something that's unbelievable. It's truly a phenomenon that is unbelievable. Because is it real? Are these people telling the truth? Is the government covering this up? Why are those hair samples not being tested? Did that person really see a wolf's head in the window? So, you just truly never know. But I believe everything. I believe everything until you tell me not to. And until I see otherwise. And that's one thing about this Dogman phenomenon is that there's been people seeing it multiple times. And there's been people that, one thing that's kind of strange about this phenomenon too is that if you've never seen it, you may never see it. But if you have seen it, you'll see it again. There's a lot of people out there that have had experiences that continue to see it. This creature. And one thing too that's kind of interesting about this whole topic, and people always talk about it being spiritual, that it's a demon, that it can manifest, or that demons can manifest themselves into Dogman because people are so scared of this topic, and they're so scared of this, or they've seen that. So it's kind of interesting. It's just very interesting to me, and and I want to make sure that I cover basically all the grounds of the basics. If I miss anything, let me know. Let me know. Shoot me a message on Facebook. Let me know if you got a story. Because one thing I am doing is I'll continue to tell stories. And if you want me to give you credit on a story, just give me your name. But I appreciate you guys listening in. We're almost to 3,000 audio listens. I still cannot believe that I'm at that. This podcast has done that and people listen to it. It's baffling to me, I guess, really. But I appreciate you guys. I really, truly do. We're almost at 3K. One thing too is kind of my test and kind of my way of doing things. Is my goal is to make sure every one of my episodes has 100 listens, because that means 100 people listen to it. And right now we're almost at that goal. So I think we're like 4 listens away from every one of my episodes having over 100, which is awesome. I can't thank you guys enough. And like I said, we're technically on the podcast game. This is a fairly new podcast, but I appreciate you guys listening in. You can catch me on Facebook, Yahola Tiger, TikTok, One Man Band 918, Twitter, One Man Band 918, and also guys, go like the Facebook page. I have it up. I have all the new episodes that roll out. Please share, like, comment, and if you listen to this podcast enough, go rate it wherever you can rate it. Helps the algorithms. Everybody talks about the algos, but I appreciate you guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.